One of the arguments that was made in favor of marijuana legalization that we now have the ability to analyze is that it would reduce drug-related crime, that gang warfare or gang violence, cartels,
right.
Other downstream consequences of illicit substance trade would erode if you legalize it. Is that true?
Yeah, no, El Chapo did not become a dentist after they legalized. He is trying to get a Wells Fargo bank account, though, and I'll talk to you about the Safe Banking Act later. But I do think that was the big promise that was made. So there was a few big promises made to us in Colorado. First was it was going to help our veterans. Second was that we'd get rid of the drug dealers and the cartels, and we'd eliminate the black market. And that has proven to be completely false. So most people, I think, would be shocked to know that more than half of Colorado's market is still served by the black market. In other words, more than half of the people using marijuana are getting their marijuana from the black market in Colorado. 70% of California's market is black market. 70% of Oregon's market is black market. And these are states where they've had nearly a decade to mature their marijuana industry.
And why is this? Are people looking for cheaper stuff or what?
Yeah. So, two main driving factors. One is the black market will never pay taxes, and the regulated market will always pay taxes. So it's going to always be cheaper on the black market. Second piece of this is the fact that people think one of the biggest things I get pushed back on is they say, well, Luke, we don't buy moonshine anymore. And that's completely besides the point, because alcohol is a much more difficult product to produce at home. Marijuana plants, you can grow them abundantly in your backyard or in your house very easily. And so that is a big concern because it's easy to grow it on the black market. You have cartels that come into suburban neighborhoods around Denver and in other states as well, but I just know this from personal experience. Cartels, we have 3 new foreign cartels that came into our state after we legalized marijuana.
Wow.
Yeah, China, Mexico, and I think it was a Nicaraguan cartel. So 3 new cartels came in. They didn't go away. They came in, and they're using the cover of legalization to buy up houses, which has driven up our real estate values because there's less inventory. So they bought up suburban homes, gut them, turned them into grow houses where they have hundreds of marijuana plants that they're growing there. And they're selling it on the black market. And so legalization is literally the cover for drug dealers to continue doing what they do. And not only that, legalization has promoted the use of the substance. So it's creating more demand. And that demand is then going to the black market, going to the dealers, going to the cartels. And so we're having more issues with violent crime and property crime. In fact, there's a lot of research now that's coming out in Colorado and a couple other states that's found in places where there's legalization, there's more violent crime. It's gone up astronomically in Colorado since we legalized it, more property crime. And that's because we're seeing more cartel activity, more drug dealers involved. And so it's odd, and it's just a little bit of a side note, but it's odd to me to see some Republicans out there espousing legalization of marijuana, for whatever reason, liberty reasons, whatever it might be, when we're in the middle of a crime crisis and we're pointing to violent crime, we're pointing to property crime. In Colorado, a big point of discussion in the elections last year was around the issue of theft of cars and all these things. Well, you ask any chief of police, I serve on the board for my chief of police in my city in Colorado. You ask any chief of police what the driving factor is for property theft and car theft, it's to buy drugs. It's for people who are addicted to drugs. So it is a really weird look to, on the one hand, say we need to address the crime crisis in this country, and then on the other hand, say let's keep passing laws to legalize marijuana when we know from the research that it is driving up crime in states that have chosen to legalize it. You look at the crime rates in Colorado and California and these other states and compare it to the crime rates in states where they don't have legal marijuana and they don't have legal drugs. It is a totally different picture.
What about the idea of gateway drugs? This is another thing that the cultural meme is that you're a dumb boomer who doesn't understand what he's talking about if you call marijuana a gateway drug. Is it?
That is a great question. So what I would say is no, it's not a gateway drug in terms of this is just purely from science. Not a gateway drug in the sense of you use marijuana and you're therefore going to start injecting heroin. Not likely. In fact, most people are not going to do that. But what we do know is that between 95 and 97% of people who are addicted to heroin, who are addicted to cocaine, they started with marijuana. So you can't deny the linkage between marijuana and other drugs, but it's not a cause and effect. So it's not a use marijuana, then use meth. It's more of a circumstance of the association and drug use. So I think a lot of people in America think, well, that person just uses that drug, just one drug. But in reality, it's polysubstance use. Nobody starts using fentanyl as their first drug. Nobody, nobody starts using meth as their first drug. They usually start with marijuana. And then once their body has kind of built that predisposition to start using substances, they'll go from marijuana to other drugs. So what we call it is and the literature really justifies this as a pathway to other substances. And so, do most people who use marijuana use other drugs? Maybe not, but most people who are using other drugs started with marijuana. So it's kind of an interesting nuance there.
I'm curious if you could give me a little bit more color on the different delivery methods of marijuana and what they've caused and done. I had this hilarious moment a couple of months ago where
don't tell me you used a pot gummy bear.
No, I did not.
That's usually where these stories go.
I was going through Instagram and I kept on getting this ad for like an olive oil infuser, and I kept on looking at it. I was like, why would you infuse olive oil that way? You could just, if you want to put rosemary or basil in your olive oil, you can just saute it in a pan. And it like took me a week before I like suddenly woke up in a cold sweat. I was like, oh, I see what that's an ad for. And it's like all the
THC
advertising,
infused.
Right? All the advertising is very clever. It didn't actually indicate what it was for, because I'm sure there's laws against
Although
that.
I'm Greek, and I will tell you, olive oil infusing is quite frequent in my family.
Well, but you can do it without a machine, is my understanding.
True. Yes, we've been doing it for thousands of years.
So tell me about the different delivery methods. What did the prevalence of vaping do to greater THC addiction? All of that. How did that work?
Yeah. So back to the commercialization issue. Commercialization, innovation, companies finding new ways to deliver the drug in a cheaper and easier to access way. Vaping was really a key piece of that, and that started with Juul, which we all understand was for nicotine vaping, but not a lot of people know that Juul started off as a THC vaping company.
Oh, really?
Called PAX. Yeah, and PAX spun off Juul to do the nicotine side of the house, and PAX does the THC side of the house. PAX is doing everything that Juul got in trouble for doing, targeting kids, social media influencers, digital advertising, all that stuff. PAX is doing that now and getting off scot-free, which is really fascinating. So yeah, we're seeing that whole dynamic play out. So they've vaping THC oils, that's a big thing. Dabbing is another thing. So dabbing is really the way youth are using it now in legal states. And basically what dabbing involves is kind of like vaping, but it's like a little dab of a little bit of wax of THC, highly potent, usually up to 99% concentrate, and then they vaporize it and use a dab rig to inhale it, and it gets them very high, very, very fast. Folks will black out, brown out. You can see it on YouTube. It's kind of a crazy thing. So that is kind of some of the newer delivery mechanisms that we're seeing that you think about this just from a societal perspective. We don't have a scientific understanding of what that's going to look like, of millions of people doing that on a regular basis over an entire generation. What does that do to you down the road? What does that do to economic productivity? What does that do to, we're seeing some issues with marijuana use and, fertility, for example, for men. So what does that do to the family? What does that do to, offspring? What are the downstream effects of that? We had to learn it the hard way with tobacco, where we had no idea what was going to happen when we started mass producing and mass using a substance. Are we going to have to go through that all over again with marijuana at a population level? Those are the kinds of things that we think about. But yeah, we have all these new innovative ways to use it that are creating more harm, more addiction, particularly with dabbing. I'll just give an example of a neighbor of mine. Her name is Laura Stack. She lives just a few minutes from me down the road in Colorado. Her son, Johnny Stack, 2 years ago, dabbed marijuana, had a psychotic episode after that, and then jumped off of a parking garage to his death. So these are the stories that are now accompanying this. And so, yeah, I mean, that's different than smoking a joint, in the 1970s. Very different.
Yeah. I mean, it's even a meme in like comedy where like, older comedians will talk about, you used to be able to pass around a joint and be a light buzz, whereas now It's like you're going to like go to Mars.
Right.
What about the children side of this, right? I mean, with the proliferation of anything, it will inevitably percolate down to children. One, do the advocates of marijuana legalization, do they still make bright line distinctions about childhood use versus adulthood use? But in practice, how is that actually playing out?
Yeah. Well, the marijuana industry has been really good with their big brother, Big Tobacco, who now, by the way, is their largest investor. Altria, Philip Morris is the largest tobacco company on the planet. They put $2 billion into the marijuana industry. So they're, very much closely aligned. They've learned a lot from tobacco. And they say this is only about adults. It's not about kids. And one of the biggest arguments I hear is legalize, regulate, so you can card people. And so intuitively, people think, oh, if it's legal and regulated and they're carding people at the door, then like surely kids aren't going to get into it then. And then I kind of look around the room and I say, well, I went to public high school. How did that work for alcohol and tobacco exactly? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know where people kind of have forgotten about like the fact that those things flow like water through youth's hands in this country. So legalizing, regulating does not prevent our kids from getting into it. So yeah, youth are using it. If you look at, so I have a slide deck I do on this, but if you look at a graph of yearly use and monthly use for youth in legal states versus non-legal states, it's not even in the same conversation. I mean, it's much higher in legal states than in non-legal states. So youth are using it more. Addiction rates are higher. So there was a study that came out recently that said after legalization, every single state that legalized marijuana saw a 25% increase in cannabis use disorder for youth. So youth are getting more addicted to this substance in legal states. We know the message that it sends because the products that they're using are clearly targeting kids. So with tobacco, a lot of us are probably too young to like know have experienced it, personally, but they were using, candy cigarettes. They had Joe Camel. They had mascots. They were using all sorts of child-friendly packaging and colors and products and all that stuff. We're seeing that now a little bit with Juul and some of the other vaping companies. Same thing is happening with the marijuana industry, where they've got, Sesame Street characters. Like a pot shop in Denver was literally using Cookie Monster to advertise its pot cookies. Then they've got Girl Scouts flavors. I could go on and on and on. Gummy bears, all these things. And people say, well, we'll just regulate that. Like, we'll write laws that say that's wrong, right? And it's like, every single state that's legalized marijuana says you can't target kids. You can't have child-friendly packaging. So explain to me how Cookie Monster ends up getting through and getting approved by regulators. Well, it's because these industries are able to overpower the regulatory state. And you can't possibly fund these regulatory agencies, nor maybe should we. That's another conversation. You can't possibly fund them enough to stop a multi-billion-dollar industry from doing whatever it is they want to do. And I think that's what we understand with tobacco.
So 10 years on from the big legalization wave that started, what is the status quo of marijuana legalization across America? How many states have legalized, how many medical, and how many have chosen a different path? And then let's have a conversation about what you guys are doing in order to push back against the legalization wave. Yeah,
so there's about 22 states that have legalized recreational marijuana, about 30-ish states with medical marijuana.
And that includes that list of 22.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 8 more.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then, and about 36 medical marijuana, but those medical marijuana programs kind of vary. Some states like Iowa allow very low potency CBD oil, and they call that medical marijuana. So it kind of varies, but I would say like 25-ish states with kind of full blown medical marijuana programs. And so what we're seeing right now is, what started with the normals of the world and the kind of stoner generation now has become a very industry focused effort of just, Constellation Brands is the largest alcohol conglomerate in America. They're now $4 billion in the marijuana industry, along with tobacco, who I talked about. So you have alcohol, tobacco, and then like the former Purdue Pharma CEO is in the marijuana industry now, which is crazy. He wrote the playbook for OxyContin, and now he's writing it for marijuana. So anyway, and so you see these big folks, and you see hedge funds from Wall Street getting involved as well. So it's become a very big business push. Billions and billions of dollars being made, billions of dollars at stake. Interestingly, and we'll get into the Safe Banking Act maybe later, but the American Bankers Association and a lot of the big banks now are making marijuana a top issue for them because they want to bank this stuff. So it's really becoming a gold rush in terms of a money play. Very little conversation about whether or not this is a good idea for society or whether or not more people should be using drugs or getting addicted, blah, blah, blah. But that's really what's happening now. And so we're seeing kind of an inflection point, though, I will say, where, yes, we've got, large number of states that have done this, but just in the last 2 years, we've seen 4 out of the 6 states that voted on it reject it. Most recently, it was Oklahoma, where every single county in Oklahoma rejected legalization.
Wow.
Just a couple months ago.
Including Tulsa.
Everywhere. Every single county rejected it by a wide margin. And so I think what we're starting to see, and Arkansas had a similar interesting result where it was like a 20-point victory.
What were the 6 states?
So Arkansas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, and South Dakota all rejected it. Maryland passed it. And there was one other state, and I'm forgetting.
Montana? No.
Yeah, Montana. Yes. So Maryland, Montana over the last 2 years. So it was interesting to see, though, just with Oklahoma and Arkansas, which were just in the last year, rejecting it, where we're reaching an inflection point of kind of, there's a lot of now research, a lot of articles now being written about the negative aspects of legalization, the crime impacts, the increases in drug use, the fact that it never helped with the opioid crisis like people said it would. In fact, you look at states with marijuana and they actually have higher rates of fentanyl overdose than states without marijuana, which doesn't necessarily mean it's causal, but it just means, marijuana didn't fix that problem for us. So I think we're seeing a lot more written about this issue, a lot more understanding of, well, this is what happens when you legalize it. And I think voters are now kind of saying, I don't want my state to become like Colorado, quite frankly, which is unfortunate because I'm from Colorado, love my state, but made a really bad decision with that policy call. And so I think, though, people are kind of waking up to that.